What's up, everybody? Today we're going to be covering how to turn on the Neve and how to record into the Neve and just show you kind of the setup and some of the routing and the specifics and things you'll need to know to use the board to do a recording session. So we'll go ahead and start with turning on the board and the hardware. So over here on the racks at the very bottom there is a power conditioner. And you're going to first want to switch on the power conditioner, which will power up the rack with all of the converters and various devices, compressors and reverbs, etc. It also powers the board as well. So once the rack is powered up, the board is plugged into the rack. So we'll need to turn on the Neve console next after turning on the power conditioner. If you reach behind the board, just behind the speaker there is a switch that goes side to side, and once you find it, you go ahead and power it up. You go ahead and power it up and the board will power up and you'll see all this lights flashing and all that good stuff. Now the next thing you want to do is to turn on the screens. We have three monitors here. The monitor that is on the console is a touch screen monitor, and it mirrors the screen that is on the wall in the big TV up there. So the next thing I'll do is power up the TV via this Roku remote that's usually sitting on top of the board. And then next we'll want to power up the screen that is on the Neve. There's a button at the very, very bottom right edge here. And once the screen is powered up, it might not turn on, so you might need to tap the mouse, click the keyboard a couple times, and eventually that screen will power up. Okay, so at that point you're going to want to log in to your account, and once you do that, you'll be able to, basically have access to the computer. A couple caveats here. These three screens, like I said, the screen that is on the Neve and the TV on the wall are mirroring each other. The startup login screen might only appear on the TV, not the screen down here, so you want to power both of those on so that you can sign in. This third screen in the center, this is the screen for the Neve's computer. So the Neve has its own PC Windows 95 computer that basically controls digitally all of the analog things on the console. So you've got kind of a mix of the Mac computer that's sitting on top of it, on top of the console right here, and that's going to have the Pro Tools. That's what's connected to your converter. And then this screen in the center right here is controlling the Neve. They're two separate kind of systems that work simultaneously. Okay, so once we log in and everything's up and running, we can kind of move on to setting up for the session and routing and setting up mics and getting levels, which we'll do on another shot here. But that is how you power up things and how you log in. And from there, we'll start to continue through the session setup. All right, so we're in the studio now, and we have first started by creating an input list, which is always a really good thing to do if you're doing a session, to stay organized and know where your inputs are going, what mics, what instruments. So we have an input list showing the patch, basically which microphones are going into which patch bay, which instrument those are on, the specific mic for reference, and we'll also have a column for phantom power. So some of these mics are going to need phantom power, and we're going to want to know that when we're back in the console and assigning phantom power to the specific channels that need it. We also included a headphone input list as well, since we're going to be routing headphones to headphone stations so that the musicians in this room can do their own headphone mixes and set their own levels. So we've got the drums mic'd and set up. We're doing 4 mics on the drums, and we have a bass guitar through a DI box in this room. So we're gonna have two headphone stations in this room, and we're running most of our mics into the snake, which is routed into the patch bay. Okay, so over here I wanted to talk about and show you the headphone station plug-in situation. So we have it's called the Power Play by Behringer, but it's a distributor. And basically what this does is this allows you to connect numerous headphone stations that are all supplied power so that they don't need to be plugged into the wall outlet. So basically what we have is a Ethernet cable or an alternate cable running into the input, and that's coming from the wall jack over there. And then we have two headphone stations that are routed into channels 1 and channels 2 via this Ethernet cable. And they each power a headphone mixer station. So this allows the musicians to control their own levels, which is really nice so that the engineer doesn't have to handle that and do that routing and leveling on the board. There is about 16 different channels here. We're going to be using channel 1 for drums. And once you click on channel 1, you have the control of treble, mids, bass, volume. There's also a limiter, which I would recommend turning all the way to the right, which is actually off. All the way to the left is the limiter fully engaged, which sometimes gives you some weird audio sounds, so I would start with that all the way to the right. And there's an output volume for the overall headphone outfits, headphone volumes that are feeding into the headphones. So one of the things you might want to consider is how high the output volume is, and then setting each of these individual volumes to your liking, but being aware that the output volume is kind of like a master volume. Yeah, these headphones are plugged into the back of the unit out of the headphone jack, which is a 1/4-inch TRS, and then the alternate input is going to be what's connecting from the distributor box. Okay, for a closer look at the patch situation, I wanted to point out that we have a XLR snake plugged into the first 8 channels, which is sitting in front of the drum, so we don't have to use super long, XLR cables running across the room, as well as where we plug the Ethernet. So this is going to basically feed the headphone mix signal from the other side of the wall into your Power Play distributor box. All right, so we're back in the control room, and we're going to be doing patching next. So based on our input list in the other room, we're going to be routing signal from the patch bay, which, depending on your setup, these are marked for the individual rooms that are all connected within the patch bay system here. We're going to be routing our first 5 channels from the recording studio into the first inputs of the first 5 channels of the Neve. So over here on the wall we have some TRS to XLR cables for this purpose, and we're going to go ahead and start with mic 1 going into input 1 on the Neve patch, which is labeled down here. So you're going from a female XLR and TRS into the inputs of 1 through 5. Okay, so we're back in the control room again here. We're on the console, and we're going to do our routing to get signal into the console as well as get the headphone mixes out of the console. So once you turn on the Neve, it automatically mutes the speakers. There's a red light here on a knob or button, cut button, and you need to click that so that the speakers are live, and you're going to control your volume of the speakers and the monitors here with this red knob. Okay. Also, you're probably going to want to put up your master fader all the way up next. In order to route signals into the board, we're going to need to go to the Neve's computer here, and under the tab marked RTE, which I guess means routing, it's going to bring up a routing matrix. So you have the stereo left and right, speaker inputs or channel inputs for all 16 channels, as well as the 8T outputs, which we'll be routing into our headphones. So what you'll do is you'll click on the mix left and right button, and that will automatically queue up all the 16 channels. And then based on your input list, you're going to route headphone signals or signals out to the headphone boxes. So depending on the instruments you have in your session, what I'm going to do is on the first channel, the 8T1, I'm going to assign that across the first 4 channels because we have 4 mics on the drums. And what that's going to do is on this fader, 8T1 fader, that's going to output all of the drum tracks into the headphone mixer on channel 1. Next up is going to be the bass. So on the 8T2 row on channel 5, which is our bass, I'm going to set that. So that means on channel 1 of the headphone box, you're going to have the drums and you can change the levels. On channel 2, you have the bass. And on channel 9, you have the talkback, which is something you can engage by clicking on this button that's marked TB. So whenever you want to use the talkback and talk to the musicians through the headphones, you hold that down and you say, play the kick drum, or whatever you need from them. And that's going to go right to their headphone mixer on channel 9. Okay, so once we have the routing set up here, we can start moving into getting levels on each of the instruments. And that's going to be our next order of business. We're going to want to do a few things as well. There's a knob here marked DIR, I guess for the direction of the signal. We're going to want to set that to be pre-fader on all of our channels that we're recording into the board. If you want to have it be post pre-fader, but post effect, say you have like EQ or compression that you wanted to add on that specific channel, you're going to need to engage the dynamics or the EQ. There's a button on each of these channels. So if I wanted to EQ the kick drum, I would need to engage the EQ button. And if I want to record the EQ or the compression, I would set the DIR knob, press that in twice, and that's going to show the pre and channel, which means it's pre-fader, post-effect. One of the things to consider when you're deciding to do this or not is you can't undo it. So if you do some crazy EQ and dynamic thing that might not sound good or might handcuff you when you're mixing later, you might not want to go crazy with the EQ and dynamics. So just be subtle with it. If you are going to print and record that effect, post-effect, you're going to be committed to it. It's going to record that EQ and compression into Pro Tools. So usually it's safer to maybe do that in post or when you're mixing to use the dynamics and EQ, but you can do it while you're recording. If you are using the EQ and dynamics, you're going to need to engage those on the channel strip on each track that you're going to use it on. And over here on the Neve computer screen, you are going to change your tab to EQ or dynamics. And from there you can use the pots on the DAW console control EQ dynamics module right here. And you can make those adjustments to your compressor or your EQ. Now, besides using the mouse pad over here and selecting these things and using the mouse cursor, you can use the buttons on this, this part of the module. So there's an EQ and a compressor. If you hit EQ and dynamics, that'll change between those two page views. And then you can use these pots to change those adjustments. And if you want to go from channel 1 to channel 2 to channel 3 and continue setting EQ and dynamics, you of course need to engage those over there on each of those channels, make sure those green lights are engaged on those effects that you want to use. And you can change the channel via these arrows on this same part of the control module here. So as far as toggling back and forth and making adjustments to EQ and compression, that can be done on the board here or with the cursor if you want to use that. Okay, so next up we're going to set our input levels and have our musicians playing in there and set our preamp levels and all that good stuff. Okay, so while we're standing around doing this, I'm going to go ahead and create my inputs and create my tracks for Pro Tools. Pro Tools is already open, but I'm going to be using five tracks here, so I'm going to create 5 mono audio tracks. and I'm going to go ahead and label these 5 tracks. So we have the kick drum. After I label the track name, which can be done by double-clicking on the track name in Pro Tools, you can quickly toggle to the next track by holding down Command and hitting Return, and that will advance you to audio track 2, which will be the snare, Command Return, overhead left, Command Return, overhead right, Command Return, bass. Okay, so automatically when you open Pro Tools, you're going to have your inputs assigned in numerical order. So we already have input 1 through 5 set up, so we don't need to change our inputs. But if you are using different inputs than what's on the patch bay, you just want to make sure those things line up. Okay, cool. So we're going to move on to setting our levels next. So if the door is closed, you're going to want to use your talkback to communicate. So whenever you want to tell the drummer to play this or that, you're going to need to hold down the talkback and say, "Drummer, can you play the kick drum for me, please?" Okay, so over here we have the main preamp gain, which is that top knob. And we also have a trim knob, which is this gray knob below it. So depending on how hard you want to push the transistor of the preamp, sometimes you might want to get some of that gritty distortion, analog, Neve sound, which can be done by turning the level of your gain up high and then turning your trim down low. But we're just going to keep it nice and clean. And I'm turning the preamp level up and trying to get my signals to be, I'm looking to get them above 0. I want them to be kind of hot on the console because they're analog mic pre's and they sound good when they're pushed hard. So I'm going to get a kind of a pretty strong level there. And to hear that, I need to turn on my monitors here, turn up my volume, and then we can hear what the kick drum's doing. If I want to do EQ and dynamic adjustments, if I want to engage those, I would, turn on the EQ, and on channel 1 I would make adjustments to the EQ. But we'll forgo that just for the demo's purpose. All right, cool. Kick drum level's good. We're going to go to, "Please play snare for me, Tyson." All right. Now, as I'm setting these levels, I'm also looking at the meters on the DAW to just make sure I'm not peaking on the digital realm and the DAW side. So here we are once again, turning up that level. Okay. It's a little hot. You see how I hit the red on the screen there? I'm going to back that down a little bit. I want it to be healthy but not too loud. A little too much still. Okay, cool. Can you play the whole kit for me, please? So, on any mics that need phantom power, you're going to want to engage phantom power, of course. And I'm going to do that with the faders down in case we get any popping or weird sounds. So we're going to have phantom power on the overhead left, overhead right, and the bass. So I'm going to go ahead and engage the phantom power before I turn the preamp up. Yeah, those levels are too hot. There we go. Okay. Just monitoring both the DAW meters and the... Now, one of the things that I'll point out here is depending on your view of the meters, you can be in VU or you can be in true peak view, PPM. So if I'm in the VU mode, my 0 is actually 0. That's going to be unity gain. Whereas if you're in the PPM meter, it's going to show those signals going all the way up to the top of the meter. So that's what was kind of throwing me here. I'm making my signals a little hot, but I want to make sure that I'm not peaking my DAW anywhere, turning my trims down, making sure I'm getting a good signal in the DAW, but not too hot. Still pretty hot. Okay, cool. And then our fan and power should be all fired up, so I'm going to go ahead and turn those, arm those tracks and Pro Tools and the overheads. And as it sits, I'm getting a pretty healthy level already on my meters. So I'm going to put a pad on the 2 overhead mics so I can push the preamps a little bit more. I'm going to set my trim at 0 just to start and start turning up the gain. Okay, try to make those even between left and right as much as you can. Okay, with the pad on the overheads, that seems to work pretty well. And this is what our drums sound like. Okay, cool. Can I hear bass next? Of course, I didn't have my faders up. Make sure your faders are up as you're doing this, or you're not going to hear the overheads. Our levels were sitting good, but you're going to need to turn the faders up if you want to hear these sounds through the monitor. Okay, so there's our bass already showing a decent signal. Let me arm that bass track. So we're already pretty hot, so I'm going to pad the bass and start turning up the mic pre. There we go. Oh, get the trim back up a little bit. So you're always balancing between the gain of the preamp and the trim. Like I said, if you want to get that gritty sort of saturation of the preamp overdriving, you can turn the gain up and the trim down, but I'm going to try to keep it clean for now. Okay, so looks like we got a pretty good signals into the DAW, and I'm going to ask the musicians in there if their headphones are working for them. Okay. For the headphones, they're being sent out of the 8T outputs, which are controlled by the 8T faders. So currently, with the faders down, those musicians aren't hearing any signal in there. So I'm going to want to turn up the drums and the bass so that they're going to be getting those in the headphones. And then I want to, ask and see if they have levels and help them out with their headphone stations if they need it. But starting at 0 with those faders is a good starting point. Tyson, are you hearing the headphone mix the way you would like in your headphones? Okay, sounds like everything's good to go. So at that point, we're going to start tracking, and we'll get some musicians in there, and we'll break to that. All right, so we just got done tracking drums and bass, and now we're going to do overdubs. So when we're recording, we have all of our channels set to basically receive signal from the microphone. And when we're going to overdub things, we are going to need to play these channels back through the board. So there's a few different things we got to do. On the channel strip, we need to change the input to go from mic to DAW. So I'm going to want to feed my 4 drum tracks and my bass track back through the DAW return. And that can be done by clicking the toggle switch here, that gray trim button. We're also going to need to send these new channels. We have the piano plugged into channels 6 and 7. So I have my piano on 6 and 7. Those need to be set to be the mic input. So we kind of, we have our channel strip here labeled with some tape. So this is going to be 5, 6, and 7, which are piano. Those are on mic inputs, while the other ones are on DAW inputs. Now to get that signal from the piano track into the headphone mixer, we're going to want to turn up the fader on the 8T output 3, and I'm going to want to set on the third row of the 8T output. That's going to need to be 6 and 7. Okay, so with the fader up, piano should be able to hear piano. Let's just check and make sure the piano is coming through the board and everything's good. Could you play some piano, Tyson? Okay. So we've got decent levels there. Okay, cool. Now let's check and make sure that the DAW signal is coming back in the board, so I'm going to hit play on this track. So channels 1 through 5 are playing back, while channels 6 and 7 are set to the mic input and recording in. So also 6 and 7 are being sent to the headphone channel 3, just like I did on the matrix there. All right, Tyson, can you hear everything okay? Are you happy? Yes. Okay, let's do a take. I'm going to put you in at the beginning. All right, so we'll just go ahead and cue things up in Pro Tools and hit record. Coming at ya. Okay, so now that we've got the instruments recorded, let's cover some basic mixing on the console. Okay, so looking at our inputs on the DAW, well, more so looking at our outputs of the DAW, we have every single output is defaulted to like the stereo output 1 and 2. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is in Pro Tools, we're going to want to set the outputs to every one of these tracks to be, 1 through 7. So I have to manually do that real quick here. And honestly, before we recorded the overdubs, we could have done this as well, and that would have meant that instead of everything coming through the first 2 channels, which is what was happening when we did that recording, we could have spread channel 1, kick, snare, overhead, etc., etc. So this is something I might have done in the last step, but it still works. You're just feeding the entire mix through channels 1 and 2, unless you set them, the outputs, to be individual channels. So I'm doing that now, and all the way through 6 and 7, and I'm going to want to either manually change those remaining 2 channels to be DAW return setting on the toggle of the trim button, or on the console there is a DAW return mode that basically does that across all of the tracks. So you kind of see those lights going. If I go from mic channel select to DAW channel select, it'll switch everything to be DAW return. So either way, now we should have playback of every single individual track coming into the board. So we've got kick, snare, overheads, bass, and then our piano. Okay, so what's happening is the signals are coming into the console via every individual channel, and we can continue our mixing with EQing or compressing various tracks. So say I wanted to do the kick drum by itself, I can solo the kick drum. Kick drum's kind of quiet here, so I might go into the dynamic mode on channel 1 and see if I can compress that a little bit. See if I get some signal a little bit hotter here. Pretty quiet mic, but EQ wise I can make adjustments to the EQ as well. But you can continue to do that on all of your channels, set analog, EQ, and compression. If you wanted to use some of the rack mounted hardware, which on our system is only on channels 9 through 16, and we don't have tracks on those, but if we per se wanted to route a EQ or a compressor on channel 9, we would need to engage insert 1, and then we'd manually patch into the patch bay, which I'll show you maybe on a different camera. We would manually need to route from insert send 9, and say we want to go into this compressor right here. We would go, that's the 576, so that would be the input of the 576, and then from the output of the 576 back into the return of the insert on that same channel. And then from there, when we engage that insert, we can set our compression settings over here and get the compression we want, and that signal that we're hearing is the post-effect signal because it's inserted into the channel into the signal flow of that channel. So, not that we're doing that right now, but a couple things you would possibly want to do as you're mixing is panning, right? So we have the overheads, which are stereo, could be pan stereo left and right. This blue knob right here on the channel strip, this is going to allow us to pan things. So if we want overhead left and overhead right to be panned, we need to engage that panning knob, and then we can now we have left and right speakers of the overheads. Same thing with the piano. If we wanted to do that with piano, I need to engage that stereo knob, and those can be panned left and right. Okay? Now if I wanted to add reverb, that's another thing you might want to do. Reverb is wired into the AUX outputs. So on the back of the console, the AUX outputs go into the patch bay. From the patch bay, there's a patch cable going into the input of the reverb unit, and then out of the reverb unit back into the return of the reverb returns that are a separate track over here on the console. So if we wanted to, hear some reverb on that piano, let me just loop this track. We're going to need to first turn on the AUX 1 button, which is in this blue strip right here. Turn up the volume of that. And then on AUX 1 of the channels that have piano, I'm going to engage that. And then I should start to hear reverb. And the reason I don't is because the reverb needs to be routed into the stereo mix as well. So we've got everything, all the channels routed into the stereo mix, but the reverb 1 is not. So that's another thing that needs to be routed. So after this, we should hear reverb. There it is. Yeah, so there's an on switch. The AUX needs to be engaged, and the AUX needs to be engaged here as well. And then I can dial in how much reverb I want by turning up the AUX knob. Right? So that's adding reverb, and that is a return track that's feeding the stereo mix output. So a couple other things you might do is route various instrument groups to the buses. So these can be instrument buses, these 8Ts. Instead of feeding the headphones now that we're doing playback and mixing, we can route those into various instruments. So for instance, maybe we make the drums, the first 4 tracks, which are drums. I'm going to unselect the drums from the first 4 tracks stereo mix. I'm going to route those into the first 8T buses. So now, let's see, that's piano, but let's hear drums only. Throwing up the drums here and hit play. We don't hear anything. They're not being fed into the stereo mix via the normal left and right. They're being fed by the 8Ts. And let's see, 8Ts. Now, they're fed into the 8T buses here, and you can see the signal, but we're not hearing any sound yet. And that's because the 8Ts need to be routed now to the stereo mix output. Okay, so this next row right here, 8T1, 8T2, what I'm going to do is select left channel on 8T1 and 8T2, and now I have a stereo bus of the drums where I have the left and the right on 2 different faders. So similarly, I would probably do the same thing with the other instruments, So maybe I send the bass into the 8T5, 8T3 and 4, which I'll just make stereo just because, even though it's just a mono bass, but we want to hear the bass on a bus as well. So now we turn up the bass. Now we've got bass on those mixed buses. And then finally the piano, same deal. If I want the piano, the fader needs to be up. Piano tracks, which are 5 and 6, or 6 and 7, 6 and 7, those need to be selected and routed into the 8T5 and 6, and then unrouted from the stereo mix, because you'll have a duplicate. You'll have basically twice the signal, which defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do. So now that those are set there, and we have 5 and 6, or sorry, 6 and 3, 4, 5, 6. I guess it would be 7 and 8, right? Bass. Yeah, I'm actually going to do this on 7 and 8. All right, cool. So now on 7 and 8, we have the two piano tracks. Yes. Here we go. Okay, so I can continue leveling or EQing or whatever I want to do, panning. Everything's done on these faders and balancing. Other things that we can do here is insert a stereo mix bus, our stereo mix bus effects. So we have a insert for the stereo mix, which can be engaged by turning on the insert and the button for the mix bus insert, and that's going to be applying a stereo bus EQ and a stereo bus compressor on the rack here. And when we hit play, now we're seeing the settings and the compression and the EQ happening, and we can make adjustments on the EQ or the compression, and we have now another layer of effects that we can mix with on the stereo kind of stereo mix side of things. So you go ahead, you make all your adjustments, you get your EQs and your levels and everything you want to do, and then you want to print. That's kind of the final step of this process. So in order to print, I need to create a new audio track or stereo audio track. So I'm going to create myself one stereo audio track, and what I will do with this stereo audio track is that I will set the inputs to be channels, should be channels 25 and 26 if I'm not incorrect. Yep. So channels 25 and 26 are the stereo output of the board into the DAW, right? So this is how I print my mix. So don't need to route anything. I just need to arm the track and maybe call it print, and set its inputs to be input 25 and 26. I'm going to mute that track too because it'll sometimes feed back. But let's just hit record and see if we're getting, let's see, yeah, there's that feedback. So you have to mute that print track. But it will record once you hit record. So for instance, we've got it armed. You want to mute your print track, or it'll feed back. It already started to do it. So always print your mute track, or mute your print track before you're doing your stereo bounce. There it goes. So that's going to be printing all of your effects, all of your levels. If you want to do live kind of level adjustments as things are going, oh, here's that chorus, let me bump up the guitar, the voice, or whatever's going on. You can kind of like manually change things, and that will be kind of reflected in the mix, in the print. Your EQs, your compressors, your stereo bus EQ and compression, and your reverb returns are all being fed into that, and everything is analog summed on the console, so you get that nice analog Neve summing sound, that is how you record and mix on the Neve. So shutting down the console is a specific process. Of course, you want to take your patch cables and put those back, undo phantom power before you unplug mics and all that good stuff. But when you're ready to shut the Neve down and turn everything off, you want to do it in this order. First thing is you go to the computer, and you're going to go over here to System tab, and you're going to click on Turn Off Console and click Yes, and that's going to turn off the computer, the console computer, which needs to be done first before you power things down. If you shut down the console and turn off the power when the computer's booted up, it's going to cause problems. So make sure that that screen goes blank after it shuts down, and then from there you can turn the Neve off via that same switch you turned it on right back here on the left side, the top, pushing it to the left side. That shuts down the Neve. You can still work on the DAW because the DAW and the computer are not connected to the rack power supplies or anything. So if you need to like finish up working in Pro Tools and saving things or whatever you got to do, you can do that. But after you shut down the Neve and turn off the Neve, you would next save your session and probably get out of the computer and all that kind of stuff, quit, and then log out, and then you can power off the rack via the very bottom here on the Black Lion rack, this power switch at the very bottom, and then put the cover on the Neve, turn off the monitors. You're going to need to power off the computer monitor, or the monitor that's on the Neve itself. There's a power switch there. And then you're going to power off the screen up there, cover the Neve, turn off the lights, and you're all done. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this was helpful, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.